Hello YouTubers, this is part 22 of the Arocs Tipper build and is the last in this series. In this video I'm fitting the tipper actuator. All that's left to do now is to wire up the side repeater lights, but I'm holding off doing that until a small electronic switch arrives and I can do two small jobs at the same time. And at the end of this episode there's some photos of the complete model and a short video showing the model working. You join me at a stage where I'm putting the two halves of the second chassis rails together. The box at the back is where the ACU01 goes. Already mounted the two limit switches for up and down on the far rail that you can see, and these brackets going on now only mount on the one side, on the one pair of rails that is, and they're used to locate these pair of rails to the other pair of rails when the unit comes down. I put that in the wrong hole. There we go. Let's get it right. There's two of these each side. The confusing thing about this is trying to work out which parts you fix to this and which parts you fix to the truck. I mean, if you're having a static model then you'd just do all of the nuts and bolts up and it wouldn't matter. But obviously this pair of rails moves with the tipper bed. So these have got to be fixed to the tipper bed, which you'll see shortly. That's all the parts for that side. It's just two cross members and the box that the ACU01 goes in, which incidentally has got captive nuts in it. I had to put glue on them to hold them in place because it's just plastic. There we go, just tighten them up. Okay, got the top box on at the moment for where the ACU01 goes. You can see some of the wires coming out of it. This particular part here now where we'll be fitting the actuator unit itself to this pair of chassis rails. A long pair of arms on the actuator bolts about halfway down the two aluminium chassis rails, and they bolt in place with these long screws and collars, one on each side, like so. That's where they'll go. There's a washer that needs to go on these main frame parts and it has to be glued in place. So you need to be careful here you don't use too much glue and end up gluing the pin as well, because these main frames move. So what I'm going to do here is put a very small amount of glue just on the one side and use a little toothpick to just accurately spread it just around the outside. Just a very thin film. You can get it where you want by just using the pin as a pilot to hold it. With this super glue it glues pretty rapidly. When you've done both, a little bit of grease on the chassis. And it just about drops in between the two. Testimony to Mia. So tolerances are superb. Just going to hold these arms out of the way for a minute. I just need to get that bang on in line so I can get the screw and the collar through. Just need to pull him forward a little bit, which I can do with a screwdriver. There we go. A bit of grease just before I push it all the way through. There we go. On the other side it has another thin washer, another 3mm washer and a lock nut. Because you wouldn't be able to get a screwdriver on the heads of these, they are Allen key type screws, or bolts if you want to call them that. So they take a little bit of doing up. You can't get anything bigger in on this side either, so using a little spanner under Allen key. A little bit of patience and before you know it they're both done. That should now pivot on there quite nicely. At this point it's necessary to put the rest of the cables in, because this part faces down and once it's in place you're not going to be able to put any of the cables in. So we're looking at connecting the down limit switch, which I'm doing now. You can refer to the instructions to tell you where to put them. The upper limit switch. The control for the transmitter to operate it is hardwired already. The only other two connections to make are this one, which is the manual switch, which is in the aluminium side box, side container. The power cable, which is on the back of the truck at the moment. And last but not least will be to connect the blue and the black wires, which are the motor control. So this is where it gets a little bit fiddly. And once the power connections are on, there is a direct connection to the battery. So the ACU01 should go live as soon as this is plugged in. And that is now live. The lights have come on the ACU01. If I now just operate the switch, you can see the motor moving up at the moment. and there you can see the motor moving down so the three-way switch works correctly. The other thing to check, of course, is that the transmitter can control it as well, and yes, it does. And the last thing to check are the limit switches to make sure that they are working as well. Super, that all works fine. Now the chassis connects nearest to you with a long axle pin. And I'm just establishing some nuts and bolts at the moment to allow it to connect. The two thin long pegs need to be bolted to this chassis rail about a third of the way down with some special screws and washers so that they can do up and still allow them to freely move. The one on the other side, you just have to put just a very slight bit of inward pressure to get it within the chassis rail, and exactly the same thing again, nuts and bolts to hold that in place. With those done up, we're now working on the back of the tipper. I'm just using a smaller rod at the moment just to push some grease through. This isn't the actual rod, it'll get replaced in a minute with one that's a little bit longer. Plenty of grease in here. Your main bearing pivot point. Push the other shaft out, which I don't need, and there's the main one. And that's held in quite simply with two of the removable clips. And that's fixed in place now. Difficult to see, I know, but I can't turn it round very easily because of the wires, but the little cam items that I'm fitting at the back, one either side, is the bed gate lock. It's quite a clever little device that as the tipper drops back down to its horizontal position, these little cams come out and up, and they lock the bed gate in place. Conversely, as the tipper starts to go up, they release, and then gravity from the load would push the back door open to release the load. So there's no need to sort of lock and unlock the rear gate, it's done automatically. Just one of these on each side. Once these are done, it's a case of turning the whole thing over and fitting it onto the truck chassis, which is rather difficult to show you, but I do have some photographs of it once it's in place. And the other thing that I've done as well is cut a number of the cables and reduce their length because they are much too long, rather than try and hide loads of cable. That's it. I hope you found this series interesting, not just the build of the truck but also another example application of the highly configurable BIA SFR1. I've certainly enjoyed the build, and again I'd like to thank Joanne at Fusion Hobbies for supplying the model at a very competitive price. I'm Colin and you've been watching Tamiya Truck Building. Until my next series, thanks for watching.